Well, hello, everyone. It's John Laughland here. I'm the director of FVD International, Forum for Democracy International. Welcome to this week's forum. I'm delighted to say that we have as our main guest this week a young man from Switzerland. I'm speaking to you this week from Paris, Nicolas Rimoldi. Hello, Nicolas.
Hello, John. Thank you for having me today.
It's a great pleasure. I first met Nicolas Rimoldi 1 year ago in August in Budapest, when we were invited together with Thierry Baudet and Frederick Janssen to what was in fact the creation of a pan-European political alliance between various conservative parties, united by an interest in national sovereignty, an interest in direct democracy, hostility to COVID measures, hostility to the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, and so on. And Nicolas and I then met again earlier this year in Bulgaria, a continuation of the same group of people, more or less. One or two new people came to Sofia from those who had been in Budapest. And Nicolas is the founder and the leader of a brand new political party in Switzerland. Nicolas, perhaps you could start by telling us something about your party, Mass-Voll. What does Mass-Voll mean, and what is the goal of your party?
Thank you very much, John. The movement Mass-Voll thinks it is enough. We've had enough. The policy of Switzerland, all the political parties, they don't serve the Swiss people anymore. The left, the right, they are all globalists, destroying our direct democracy, our wealth, our health, and our sovereignty. So we formed in 2021 a new movement. First, we were just a bunch of young people, students, men, women from a young age, thinking, no, now we're taken to the streets. Something has to change here. We formed ourselves against the COVID certificate, against the lockdown, against the mandates. We organized a lot of demonstrations in Switzerland, the largest in Swiss history, because you have to know the Swiss people is not a people of demonstrations, of great protests, of great rallies. And Switzerland, if something doesn't add up anymore, if something goes wrong, Swiss people start to collect signatures to change the constitution, to hold a referendum. Well, going to the streets is not a thing Swiss people usually do. But that all changed in 2020, 21, with our movement and many others taken to the streets, protesting all these attacks on our fundamental rights. And now, 3 years later, we are more or less a movement who is attacking the old parties of Switzerland on every possible scale of Swiss policies, through elections, referendums, protests, letters, information campaigns on YouTube, TikTok, and so on. We are still growing in numbers, in members, in the strength we have in our projects. We're still building up. And yeah, there's a brighter future ahead of us, ahead of the Swiss people, because of our new program we did. Our electoral program has the name The Great Reset, because now it's time to start an anti-globalist policy here in Switzerland, because the root of all evil, not only in Switzerland, in the Netherlands too, in all the countries we come from, Bulgaria, Hungary, and all the others, the root of all evil is the reason why we are here today, holding this chat, this talk today. The root of the evil are the international treaties who are robbing our sovereignty, our direct democracy, our fundamental rights. And yeah, now we're here today to defend what we love, to defend the country we're coming from, and to build a future worth living.
Many of us elsewhere in Europe, and perhaps further afield, we look to Switzerland with great admiration. We who are interested in sovereignty and who are hostile to the political class, the Uni-Party, which seems to govern across the whole of the West. And we look to Switzerland with admiration because Switzerland famously is governed by referenda. There are typically, I understand, 3 or 4 national federal referenda every year, often on quite technical subjects. These are not populist moments. They take place when on really quite technical issues, often, certainly on things that people give a lot of thought to. That's at the federal level, and also, of course, at the cantonal level. There are very often referenda. I don't know how many a year in each canton, but there are in 1 or 2 cantons. There are what they call Landesgemeinde, where the people of the canton gather in the square and actually vote laws themselves in the square. There are 2 cantons, I believe, where that still happens. In the other 23 cantons, in the other 24 cantons, I believe that the vote is done in the usual way through a ballot paper. But we look at Switzerland with great envy and great admiration. So why is it that Switzerland particularly, because after all, Switzerland is not in the European Union. Switzerland has indeed distanced itself from the European Union by abrogating the global treaty which the European Union wanted to put over Switzerland. So, you know, in many respects, Switzerland is in a far better position than, say, France or Germany or the Netherlands, for that matter.
I wished you were right. The image of Switzerland you have now, the image Switzerland is adored worldwide as a country of freedom, democracy, fundamental rights, and the possibility to change when something goes wrong, is rather outdated, because that was many decades ago. Switzerland now is a globalized country. Switzerland has lost its neutrality, has lost its sovereignty. Switzerland, yeah, we do vote. We do vote a lot, many times a year, but on minor issues. We are the most loyal member of the European Union, although we are not de jure a member of the European Union. Most of their laws we automatically or just also adapt here. It starts with the size of the ships here in Zurich, and so many other EU regulations Switzerland adopts. And if Brussels or WHO or any other globalist entity wants something from Switzerland, the US, that we abolish our bank secrecy law, Switzerland says yes, amen to that. Swiss government has lost its ability, its strength, its backbone to resist all these demands from other countries, from the EU, from the US. We are just now a vassal state of the UN, of other major policymakers worldwide. Giving you a little example, when the war in Ukraine started, our government proudly said, no, Switzerland will never be part of the sanctions against Russia. After a couple of days, we adopted them too. Now we held a peace conference, a pro-Ukraine conference at the Bürgenstock Hotel in central Switzerland to help Zelensky and his regime getting more money and more weapons. And yeah, the list goes on and on and on and on. Switzerland is not what you think it is. It is not anymore. But we fight that it will be the lighthouse of democracy, of direct democracy, of fundamental rights again. But please tell all the people you know that the birthplace of direct democracy, the birthplace of federalism is gone too. And that you don't have to glance at a distant image of a country that you want to be in the future. If you want to have a country holding up direct democracy, you have to build it by your own and not thinking about, yeah, well, let's be like Switzerland. Switzerland now, and for decades, has been ruled by a uniparty, a cartel of 3 and 4 major parties separating the country. Amongst them, you get to rule that part, you get to rule that part, you get to rule that part, and nothing really changes. Problems don't get solved in Switzerland. If there's any problem in Switzerland, the Uniparty decides, yeah, we'll shovel it, that people don't see it anymore, with a lot of money, and the next generation can solve it. That's how the Uniparty, this cartel, works here in Switzerland, and there is no fundamental change at all. So I myself, I envy countries like yours, like Hungary, where it's much more easier and it goes much more faster to change politics on a fundamental level. Here in Switzerland, that never happens.
Nicolas, hi, Jim here from South Africa. I know all about elections and changing systems. Let me ask you a question. Do you think you can vote your way out of this?
I think that is the most important question of our time. I look at it like this. Now we are in the end game. This is the most important time in human history. Now we are at the dawn of a world government, at the end of democracy, at the end of sovereignty, of your sovereignty, at the nation, at the dawn of a new global technocracy, where all we hold dear, our values, our traditions, our identity, our democracy, is at the edge of extinction. And now we have to find a way to protect all of these values, all of what we love, to protect the future our children might have. And I believe there are many ways to protect our fundamental rights. We went to the streets, we organized protests with tens of thousands of Swiss people coming from all jobs you can imagine. We also participated in referendums, made one of them possible last year. We attack on every possible measure you can imagine. And I think it's the mixture of actions you might take. You need to vote, you need to protest, you need to make videos, and with all of them combined, we stand a chance. Success is not granted. And at the end, I don't know which way will work, but we also have to be prepared to pay the highest price. And imagine, my grandfather fought in Budapest against the Soviets in 1956. He took up arms. I hope we have never to do this, but we have to be prepared for every possible outcome, because, as I said in Geneva on the 1st of June in front of the UN headquarters, we will not go gentle into that good night, and we have to defend our freedom, our liberty by any means.
Well, Nicolas, I think your first big challenge is to reimagine Switzerland for us all, because I have to admit, I have the old stereotype about Switzerland in my mind. Well, that's half true and half joking. But we're talking about global government. I mean, from where I sit, very far away, I mean, this is just a struggle against neoliberalism that has captured the West. Okay, and I think that everything that you've said, I applaud and I support. Okay, but it's there's no world government, there's no global government. I mean, there's just an attempt at global, or the attempt to maintain global hegemony. And Switzerland, while very small, it is quite influential. I mean, it's one of those few countries in the world where you say Switzerland and everybody has this idea in their head.
Well, Switzerland is still the best place to live in. And I'm here today because my wish is that your country and all countries in the world might one day achieve a system where your fundamental rights are protected, that we don't have to protest anymore, we don't have to fight anymore. But until we reach such a level, such a day, there are very hard attacks on our freedom, especially the UN Future Pact, which we're going to talk about today, the WHO, and all the other treaties, which are really threatening, like the very essence of what it means to be human.
Well, I mean, but John, before you ask the next question, how have you been received in Switzerland? I mean, what kind of pushback are you experiencing? Because under the leadership of our great friend John Laughland, I mean, one of the most important themes of the Forum and Friends is how do we maintain our rights and be able to push against those that are wanting to deny us? I mean, it's almost breathtaking, the kind of electronic censorship and disappearing of people and creating, we live in Western society. It's like one big RICO act. I mean, if you know somebody that said this and we treated something else, you're part of it, and it's a huge web. How have you been? Are they doing the same thing to you in Switzerland that they've done to so many other people in Western polities?
I will start how all my resistance work started in 2020 in December. I was in the mountains skiing, and then I was given this yellow letter to put on my jacket. It's a yellow one, that I hold an official dispense for the mask, a yellow letter for my jacket, that I'm exempt of wearing a mask. And I was like, a yellow paper on my jacket here in Switzerland to wear publicly? Well, something really is going wrong here. And 2 months later in Lucerne, the most beautiful town of the world, I was in the town with some of my friends, sitting on a bench, smoking a cigar, nobody there. And then the police came to us and they told us to leave the square, to go. And I was really shocked. I told them, well, I'm paying taxes in this city. We are threatening no one. Leave us alone. And then they came back and said, well, in 10 minutes you need to go or we will arrest you. And that was a moment which was like where everything started, where the Mass-Voll movement started, because I was so shocked, so disappointed in the police, in the state, that they can just send away people chilling in the city for doing nothing. 1 week later, Mass-Voll was founded, and then the rest is history. In October last year, 1 day before the national election, we hold a rally in Basel, in another town in Switzerland. I was about to hold my final election campaign speech. On the way to the square, the police arrested me and many of our friends for our protection, to protect us from the Antifa. And I was in jail for about 7 or 6 hours. I wasn't able to hold my final campaign speech. And as you can expect, the next day, election Sunday, all the Swiss media were full of, yes, he was in jail again, that criminal, don't vote for him. So to give you a little image of how Switzerland too.
Well, that's not the Switzerland we all know and love, that's for sure.
Terrible. Well, the reason, apart from finding all this very interesting, and of course the Swiss model, or at least the old Swiss model, is intriguing for us all. But the reason why I wanted to have this forum with you, Nicolas, is that you do very original work, which I don't think anybody else is doing, on the various United Nations treaties, which are in preparation. You've mentioned some of these already briefly in passing in what you've said so far, but perhaps you could tell us a little more about these treaties. I think some of our viewers may know about the pandemic treaty, which was supposed to enter into force this year, but which seems to have been delayed. But you focus on a number of different UN treaties, Nicolas, and perhaps you could tell us about those.
For sure. In 2022, it all began with the WHO pandemic treaty, which is now delayed and will be finished next year. So this treaty is not on hold, it's not finished off, it will come next year. We protested it 2 years ago. We were the first organization in whole of Europe to raise awareness of the WHO pandemic treaty here at the protest in Bern. And this year, we have to face an even more dangerous treaty from the United Nations. It's called the Future Pact. In 1 month, in September in New York, the UN General Assembly will vote on that treaty. And I give you a little quote why it is so dangerous. Quote, multilateral governance designed in simpler, slower times is not adequate to today's complex, interconnected, rapidly changing world. That means, I translate, these lame governments of the member states with their democracy, with their decision-making process, are not implementing the Agenda 2030 quickly enough. Especially Switzerland's direct democracy is an outrageous annoyance. So we need to ensure that they no longer have to deal with it at the national level. The people only get in the way. We, the UN, will take over.
And how does the treaty propose to do this, Nicolas? Because we all know, or many of us know, about the Sustainable Development Goals, about the Agenda 2030, which indeed are programs for world government. Because as Thierry Baudet writes in his book, The COVID Conspiracy, when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, they are so open-ended, things like ending poverty and, I don't know, improving education. They're so open-ended that they are infinite goals, and therefore they require world government. But how does this treaty, the Summit for the Future, which, as you say, is going to take place in the 3rd week of September in New York, how does it propose concretely to take away the power of states?
Well, all what's inside this treaty is advertised. They have a really great marketing with all the best words you can imagine. It's against poverty. They will ensure human rights. They will build a better future, that the world is ready now for all these global shocks yet to come. So the people can only have security and safety and freedom with us, with this future pact. So that's how it is advertised. If you look through inside the treaty, you will find 50 actions of how they will change and rebuild the UN to a UN 2.0. And with the quote I gave you, it's all about giving all the sovereignty away from the nation state to the UN, so they can have a new committee to respond on global shocks that goes on from a pandemic, a black swan event, even aliens are mentioned inside here. So the UN now has the power, the sovereignty to respond on everything you can possibly imagine on a global scale. They build up the structure to even that world government we don't have today, but the Future Pact, the Summit for the Future, is the birth of the world government, of the world state, the end of national sovereignty.
Nicolas, do you think that Switzerland's history of neutrality, I think it goes back to the early 1800s, if I'm correct, do you think that has been an advantage to the current situation in terms of the infiltration of globalism, or do you think it's been a vice in that it has been a weak point?
Well, I would say that when I compare Swiss people to people from other countries, we have a bit more of awareness of politics. Because, yeah, although we vote 4 times a year on every topic you can imagine, on new treaties with the European Union, on cowbells, on pension funds, on everything, Swiss people are highly trained in politics. So we have a much more educated society, more politicized society than other countries have. And while everything in Switzerland is politics, everything, every day, it's about politics. Politics have a much larger space here in our society. And well, to tell if that's a good thing or a bad thing, in our perspective, it's difficult to say, because all these globalist measures, all these little party tricks they have, they work here too and might work better here. Because as I elaborated earlier, if there is any problem, just wait for the future generations will solve. That means there is, Swiss people are much more sedated, because you don't have protests like in France or in England about the replacement migration and its failures, its consequences. Switzerland has a way to hide the problems we have here. And the media here are really much state controlled. You have much less possibilities to talk about the real issues we have here. Even the largest Swiss party, the Swiss People's Party, around 30%, they don't talk about the future treaty or the international health regulations. They just talk about the EU and forget all the other issues we have here. So, well, to change something in Switzerland, I would say, is much, much harder than in many other countries.
Go ahead, Peter.
But that seems kind of contradictory to me. I mean, if it's a very politicized society, an aware society, and given in light of what you just said about these international treaties, particularly the one that's being, I guess, voted on next month in the United Nations, and what is the value of Swiss democracy if you talk about it all the time, you vote all the time, but you can't change the outcome? I don't understand.
Thank you for that excellent question. We look back to June 2030. We voted the third time about the COVID law, about the prolongation of the COVID certificate until the new Epidemics Act take over. And yes, sure, we had public debates, even in the state media, but the propaganda on that topic was so intense that we rather stood any chance in winning this election. It's not like the Brexit. The Swiss system, the Swiss media, the Swiss party cartel is so well trained in pushing through their agendas that it's hardly never possible for new movements to set up new talking points, to really make a big change in the elections. And yes, we do vote 4 times a year and on many topics. But these are not often the topics that really change things for an instant. To give you a rather horrifying example, in May, the parliament voted against the participation of the Swiss army in the NATO exercises at the front. Now, the responsible federal councillor is pushing even farther without consulting the government, without consulting the parliament, Switzerland, inside the NATO. And about that, we never voted. About the future treaty, we never voted. About the WHO, never. So yes, the Swiss people can vote 4 times a year, but most of the decision making is made up in the parliament or in the government.
So anyway. You're saying it's a managed democracy?
Yeah, democracy illusion. So the people have the idea of, yes, we live in a democracy, we can vote, but hardly never anything changes. So you give people the illusion that their voice matters, but in reality, it doesn't.
Tell us a bit more about the pandemic treaty. You've said a few words about the future treaty, the summit for the future. The pandemic treaty, we heard quite a lot about it in 2023. It was due to come into force, as I said, this year. It hasn't come into force. Why hasn't it come into force? And why are you confident that it will come into force next year? And what's in it?
Well, a WHO pandemic treaty, we don't have it this year, but next year they will work to make all the nation states agreeing to lose their sovereignty on health issues. The WHO international health regulations we have now, they had a majority this year in Geneva, and they managed somehow to put some of the critical stuff which was inside the pandemic treaty now inside the international health regulations. And the official version of why the WHO pandemic treaty has not been adopted yet is about, the third world financing vaccines for the third world. But maybe, we don't know. Now we have Mpox as a new pandemic, maybe the bird flu. And 2 weeks ago, I saw a post on X of the WHO saying that we should wear a mask, wear gloves, do social distancing, work at home, not because of Mpox, because of COVID. You can look that up on the WHO X profile. This attack on sovereignty is far from over. Maybe they just have to learn from what is happening now with Mpox in the next few months and then adjusting the pandemic treaty once again.
And are any countries opposing this? I mean, surely there must be some opposition. There's opposition on many other things. There's as we know, there's a big shift going underway with the creation of BRICS, the enlargement of BRICS, and the consolidation of the Russian-Chinese alliance. I'm talking about world geopolitics. Is there no pushback against the future treaty or the pandemic treaty within the United Nations? I don't know, from African countries or from Far Eastern countries?
I would say that if we want to learn to live in a sovereign country, if we want to learn sovereignty and to fight against the globalist organizations, we have to learn from Africa, especially from countries like Niger, Mali, or Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso, who last week stood up against the International Monetary Fund, who pushed out all the imperial forces of France, who was quitting the currency club with all the other Western African states dictated by France. So we have to learn a lot from Africa, who are many African countries opposing these treaties, because the African countries, the African people, they really know what it's about to live on foreign rulers. Switzerland and Europe hardly have forgot that a bit, or the Germans, who still have Rammstein and many other US military bases.
Nicolas, when it comes to the World Health Organization, it's a political football in American politics. It's the CCP runs the World Health Organization. It's invoked all of the time, almost, at least from my reading. People that talk about these things have no idea what they're talking about, which is no surprise. But given, and I'm glad John has brought this up, and given your interest in this area, I mean, who does run the World Health Organization? I mean, who is really making the decisions? I'm not going to go to this knee-jerk response, the Chinese, or it's Bill Gates, okay, whatever. I mean, but how do you read it? Because it's obviously a backdoor, okay, to crush sovereignty. And I think it's something that John and I have been talking about for years. When it comes to health, I'm not a doctor. You're not a doctor. I mean, this is what the fear-mongering that they are constantly using. And when I hear Mpox, I mean, you got to be kidding me. You've just simply got to be kidding me. Okay. So, I mean, now I understand why we're talking about global government, because it's going to the climate catastrophe. It's a virus catastrophe. I mean, this is how they segue into it. Okay. So, who's making these decisions, and how likely is it that they will eventually succeed?
Well, let me get to the point, to the opposition on the future treaty first. Well, the reason why nobody is talking about the future treaty, about the summit for the future, is obvious. In the past 2 years, we had worldwide a large amount of people standing up against the WHO. Everybody knows about the WHO pandemic treaty, but the future pact, nobody knows. And that's the reason why. They don't want that anymore. They don't want that we mobilize the masses against them anymore. They don't want that we are being informed about what is going on. If you read the documents from the UN about the future pact, there is written about that the governments should have public discussions about the future pact. But none of these things ever happened. Here in Switzerland, we never had a debate publicly or in the parliament about the future pact. Nothing of this sort. So that's why no media outlet, no parliament, at least none of that I'm aware of, is talking about the future pact. So we have a really high duty to inform the people, the parties, and every man, every woman we can reach about what is written inside these documents. You know, far from the question, who is really the master of the puppets? I don't know. It's not my business, I think. I'm a fighter for fundamental rights. I'm a sovereignist. I want a free and independent Switzerland, and I want that your countries are free too. So I'm fighting the documents we have here in front of us, so the people can take a look at the original documents, at the original informations. They're not hidden. They're here in plain sight. And people really should take a look on these papers.
I like your question a lot, Peter, and I share your skepticism. You know, it's too easy, isn't it, to say it's all Bill Gates or it's all the CCP. That is to misunderstand the nature of the problem. There may, of course, be influences, possibly from China. Bill Gates may have financial interest in vaccines. He certainly gives a lot of money. But unfortunately, the beast is more dangerous almost than that. What I mean by that is that what we have and what we've had in the West now for many decades is a managerial revolution. We live in a managerial state. Now that implies, of course, yes, very high levels of control. It implies all the restrictions on liberty that Nicolas is talking about. But it also implies a very curious phenomenon, which is the automatic, organic generation of rules, or rather the automatic and organic following of rules. What I mean by that is that people who operate within a managerial structure, whether it be in a company or in a governmental structure, they know what they need to do. They instinctively know. They navigate according to, I've used this expression before, the magnetic fields that govern the managerial structure. They understand those magnetic fields and they follow them, sometimes on their own initiative. And the result is that these things can be drawn up. I'm not going to say without any guidance at all, because obviously someone is writing these texts, but very often not with governmental guidance. In other words, the government's not in control. Thierry Baudet, by the way, made this point last week in Budapest. We were in Budapest together again. When you look at how governments operate, you realize, and of course we see it above all now in the White House, even more than anywhere else, you realize that the people in office are not in power. We all know that Joe Biden is not in power. He's not the person making decisions, and Kamala isn't either. 30 years ago, the Maastricht Treaty was signed, and the then British Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd was asked a question, I think a rather probing question. I can't remember what the question was, but he was asked a probing question as he came out of the summit, which had just signed it. And he said, "Oh dear, we'd better find out what we've just signed." And he was the Foreign Secretary. He was the man whose signature is on the treaty. And yet there he was signing off on something whereas in reality he didn't know about it. So I suspect that these treaties, the Future Pact and so on in the UN, are drawn up by people who work in the UN who are essentially writing their own job description. If there's going to be a world government, well, hey, it'll be run by the UN and they will have a job for life, you know, achieving net zero or erasing poverty or whatever it is. And that is, unfortunately, as I say, the characteristic of the managerial revolution. It doesn't need a great, sinister master figure. It operates almost with its own momentum.
Yeah, but also, this tail end of what John had to say there. What is menacing is that, and I haven't read this UN document, so, but I'm assuming, considering we're talking about the professional managerial class and their ethos, is that they prescribe laws, but they also have punishments, okay? Which, you know, if you don't follow, like we can take over, we have to have regime change in this country in Africa because of their carbon footprint, or because, you know, they're not dealing with mpox or monkeypox or whatever. There's always, coercion is always, if not spoken about directly, it's indirectly understood.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I can give you a name to name that little part of the beast. You might remember the US former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright. In 2015, they wrote a report confronting the crisis of global governance. She was co-chair of the Commission on Global Security, Justice and Governance. There was the birth initiative of the Pact for the Future. This report was laid out to the UN, bespoken therefore, and, well, you know, Madeleine Albright, one of the most evil persons ever to live. She was asked if killing 500,000 children in the US-Iraq war was worth the price, and she said, yes, the price was worth it. And, well, that's the kind of people we're dealing here with. And to the question if it's from China, well, sort of. In the UN Future Treaty, there is written about a need to make not just a national social credit system, but to make a global one. They even oppose the Chinese social credit system in these UN documents because it's nation controlled and the nation is not allowed to exist anymore. So the UN wants to build with artificial intelligence based on the SDGs a new global artificial intelligence, a new global enlightenment. And that's what we are heading to, a global super intelligence dictating all the rules, all the laws, all the ways of people live and work together. That's what's inside these documents here. And they even write, if you as an individual do not behave, you are to be punished, because behavior that is harming society is now, quote, forbidden.
Jem, I think you wanted to react to the social credit system.
Yeah.
I think I know what you're going to say. Go ahead.
There's no social credit system in China. This is a myth that keeps being perpetuated by Western interests. The only social credit system that occurs in China is very much along the lines of what occurs in other countries. And, you know, for example, if you apply for a home loan or something to that effect, then you'll have your credit record checked. But there's no technocratic social credit system that I'm aware of in China, other than perhaps amongst a few of the CPC elites. But this is a myth that just keeps being perpetuated. I was there just a few months ago, and in actual fact, the type of surveillance that I experienced was far lower than that I experienced when I was in Europe just a few months earlier. And when I was over there with you, John, the amount of surveillance that I was experiencing was far greater in Europe than it was in Asia.
I think the myth comes from the fact that many people in the West would love to have a social credit system. Klaus Schwab famously said it during the COVID pandemic. He said that China had got out of the COVID pandemic much better because of its particular governmental structure. In other words, because it was a dictatorship. But as Jeremy says, they don't actually have a social credit system. But I'm sure that many of the people in the UN who are drawing up these treaties would love there to be one.
Yes, I mean, it's certainly coming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, here in Switzerland, we have in a few months hundreds, if not thousands, of drones from the largest Swiss state-owned telecom company surveying 24/7 the whole country, filming, picturing everything. Like,
what are they looking for?
First movie you can imagine.
What are they looking for?
Well, just maintaining infrastructure, you know.
Okay.
Imagine that, a country like Switzerland, every square meter under surveillance, every time, every second. And think about what that means to protests, to rebellion, to opposition work, mobilize people for demonstration. Difficult.
Well, I want to address something to all three of you. I mean, I think it's like this credit system that people talk about in China that doesn't exist. And then there's kind of this default position that they're running something, you know, they up there. And I can't help but believe that, you know, there's always a financial interest here. Somebody's got to be making money off of all of this. And, you know, the United Nations has its faults and its problems and all that, and that's not the topic of our discussion here. But it's interesting to me that the UN can be used as a vessel, okay? Because who's writing these laws? I mean, is it some like grad student that I've been doing subsoil research in Sub-Sahara Africa all my life, and I get to write the law about it right now? Or is it like a fertilizer company, you know, that has actually said, this is a good way to get laws passed that are it could be draconian, and we make some money? I mean, am I being too cynical here?
In the documents for the Future Pact, it's written that the UN wants to build a global financial system that works for everyone, meaning global digital currency, and so on. It's all written here in these papers. And who defines what's the meaning of works? Everyone. Who is setting up the rules? For whom?
Well, I mean, Nicolas, I mean, the good thing is that, you know, you can have aspirations like that in a UN treaty, but the facts on the ground is going clearly in the other direction. Clearly, there may be in the interim 10, 15, 20 years that there'll be one or two or three major global axes, okay? But I mean, the flight from the dollar is evident for anyone that wants to see it.
Yeah, but the CBDC thing is definitely intended, obviously, to survey people. I was wondering, Jerm, what you thought about what Nicolas said earlier about Africa. It's true that in West Africa we've got a few, plucky little countries, but I mean, these really are effectively microstates. I mean, they are of no great. I don't want to be rude, but they're not. These are not big hitters.
Well, as Trump said, they're shitholes.
What? Yeah, exactly. I mean, I just wonder, you know, the idea of maybe I'm misunderstanding how Africa works, but I can't imagine any of this stuff actually ever being applied on that continent.
No, I think Nicolas was making a very good point when he said Africa can lead the way in many ways. So, as an African, I can tell you that it's a complete mess living on this continent. It's a polarized continent of everything you can imagine, right? From crime to wealth to whatever you want. We have everything on the extreme. But there is a sense of liberty within that chaos. And I mean, for example, here in South Africa, our vaccine uptake was, I think, lower than 2%, which is one of the lowest in the world. And I think right across the continent, you find a fairly healthy skepticism and suspicion towards government authority. And I think that's probably a result of pile of things, one of them being geopolitical influence. African countries are becoming increasingly intolerant now of Western, infiltration in everything. Here in South Africa, the heart of our economy is mining, and I think our biggest mine is called Anglo-American. And I think one of the interesting dynamics that we have now, because of the advent of the internet, is that we can now get a better picture of what's going on in the world, as opposed to, say, 30 years ago, where it was a very dark continent. And we can see what's going on in many ways and learn, because we are very behind in everything. And with us being behind in everything, it probably gives us an advantage in other areas, because we can see errors being made, on a national level, and go, well, hang on, we can avoid that. That is my take. At the moment, it's very difficult to see, because it's still, we still have to get through the fog. But I think perhaps in a generation's time, what Nicolas is saying might actually come to fruition.
Nicolas, do you want to respond?
I think people are more waking up to what happened to Gaddafi when he tried to liberate Africa from Western influences, or how Bashar al-Assad fought off the US imperialism. But we have other examples like Magufuli in Tanzania, who was murdered about his COVID politics. It takes some time. It takes a lot of time that people get awareness of what's going on. And when I look back at the past 3 or 4 years, I'm very joyful and full of hope that people more and more get a sense of sovereignty, fundamental rights, and that things are not as they are sold to them. But to end here, want to make another little quote about the UN documents, to take them in all seriousness, because, yeah, they will try with all their might to put all these lines, all these new rules, all this world government in place. And the quote is from the Future Pact, so-called action number 15, quote, "We will build and sustain peace at the national level." So what the fuck does that mean? How are the United Nations going to build peace in a country like Switzerland? And how are they going to sustain this peace? What is peace? Who defines what is peace? What is the UN going to do to make real all these actions provided here in the Future Pact? And this really frightens me.
Well, that is the problem of all international organizations. They don't have any power, and certainly no responsibility for what they do to the countries over which they have power. They are systemically disconnected because, of course, there's no world demos. So what you say is true. I'm glad you mentioned Gaddafi. I would like to add another name that very often gets forgotten. He didn't get killed, he's still alive, but the president of Liberia, Charles Taylor, was similarly removed from power. I wrote a chapter about his trial in my History of Political Trials, because it's an absolute textbook case of an African leader being removed from power for the kind of financial interests which Peter raised in an earlier question. Basically, Charles Taylor was about to sign, there's oil off the coast of Liberia and gas, I think, and he was about to sign with China, and hey presto, he found himself indicted by as it happens, the Special Court for Sierra Leone, which was entirely stuffed with CIA officials and American military intelligence officials. And he is now serving, I believe, a 50-year sentence in a prison in Britain. And I mention his case because only 2 or 3 days ago, I think it was Mike Bentz, whom I've mentioned before, talked about a CIA war game whereby they would remove a West African leader who was getting dangerously close to China. And I looked at this war game and I thought, this isn't a war game. This is exactly what they did to Charles Taylor in I think it was 2011. But of course, he's not the only example. The Gbagbo in Ivory Coast. So maybe the African reaction is all the greater because Africa perhaps has had the brunt of this even more than other continents. Nicolas, let's conclude. What is the most dangerous aspect of all these things that we've mentioning? A few last words.
Thank you very much, John. Well, I think we live in the most important time of human history now. In these times, it will be decided if we and our descendants live in a free world, as sovereign individuals with fundamental rights secured, or if we have to suffer in a globalist world state, in a one world government. And I think the most important thing is to fight now all these treaties that are attacking our sovereignty. The UN Migration Treaty, the NATO, the Future Pact, the WHO Pandemic Treaty, and all the others yet to come, because they are the heart of the evil. They are the core of the evil of all our problems we face in Europe and all over the world right now. So I think the most important thing that all of us little human can do is to fight for sovereignty. And with that, we are rescuing and safeguarding our democracy and our fundamental rights.
Thank you very much. And where can we follow you? We follow you on, I guess, on Mass-Voll, MASS-VOLL.ch. Where else should we follow you, Nicolas?
You can follow us on X, TikTok, Instagram, if not, again, deleted and censored, Telegram. And then there you can get a glimpse of Swiss politics, our takes on international politics, and our fight against the globalist system, because the globalist attack on national state sovereignty is worldwide. So we have to push them back worldwide and build alliances all together with people who fight for their countries worldwide. So
well,
what we have here is we have Switzerland and Africa, the future. Okay.
Exactly. And also Forum for Democracy International, because our slogan, you may not know this, our slogan is fighting globalism worldwide. So let's hope we get to that a little bit. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jerm. Thank you, Nicolas. And thank you to our listeners. We won't have a forum next week, but we will in 2 weeks' time. All the best. Goodbye.
Goodbye.